COVID-19 is still spreading. While some countries are using mask and vaccine mandates, Nordic countries are completely reopening. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. The world is slowly opening after more than a year and a half of COVID-19. Now, some countries are opening up faster than others. None are opening up as fast as these Nordic countries: Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Why are they opened up while many of us here are still locked down? I'll explain. Denmark was the first to lift its COVID restrictions. The Danish health minister announced back in late August that mitigation efforts and widespread support for vaccines no longer require COVID-19 to be categorized as a socially critical disease. That means no more face masks on public transportation, no more limits on public gatherings, and no more vaccine passports in restaurants, gyms, or nightclubs. And people can resume LARPing. Although, ironically, asking someone to LARP with you usually results in them social distancing. Schools and workplaces are also open, and only those who get infected have to quarantine. Norway lifted its coronavirus restrictions a couple weeks later, after they'd been in place for 561 days. Which makes sense, considering the national dish of Norway is fårikål, which is mutton and cabbage. Some of them might actually hope to get COVID so they don't have to taste this. According to Norway's Prime Minister, now the time has come to return to a normal daily life. Culture and sports venues and restaurants can now reach full capacity, and the government no longer advises against unnecessary travel outside of Europe. And anyone who knows anything about history got a little nervous when they heard that Nordic people might soon be traveling outside of Europe again. Sweden soon followed suit as the third Nordic country to open up. There are no longer recommendations to work from home or restrictions on the number of people in sports events, concerts, and hospitality venues.
Sweden is celebrating the end of COVID-19 restrictions. Now that people can walk around without masks, many feel the pandemic is over.
And how are people in Sweden celebrating the end of COVID? The same way I celebrate anything: eating meatballs while dancing to ABBA. So why are these countries opening up earlier than most of the world? Part of it is thanks to the decrease in COVID cases and high vaccination rates. In an interview with Norwegian media outlet VG, the infection control director of the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, or NIPH, said that Norway should shift the way it views the coronavirus. Now, to be fair, American politicians did this a year and a half ago. They all stopped viewing coronavirus as a disease and started viewing it as an opportunity. According to the NIPH director, we are now in a new phase where we must look at the coronavirus as one of several respiratory diseases circulating with seasonal variation. The seasonal disease? What, like the common cold, the flu, or everyone suddenly being obsessed with pumpkin spice? Calm down, it's just cinnamon and nutmeg. It does not belong on pizza. So does this mean COVID is over if you live in Norway? Not exactly. I'll explain after the break. Welcome back. The infection control director of the NIPH says that while COVID-19 isn't gone, Norwegians should look at it as one of several respiratory diseases circulating with seasonal variation. Several media outlets then took that to mean we can now compare the coronavirus with the flu, which is ridiculous. Because if you've been in any internet comment section over the past 18 months, you know everyone's already been comparing it to the flu. But some online news sites took this story and ran with it. World Today News went so far as to say Norway has reclassified COVID-19 as a common flu. And Free West Media went even further to claim the coronavirus is no more dangerous than the ordinary flu. And the Puffington host finished the game of telephone by reporting, Norway says COVID is just a flu, purple monkey dishwasher. But this is not true. First of all, it's already been well established that COVID-19 is not just the flu. COVID-19 spreads faster and kills a higher percentage of infected people than the ordinary flu. just like a few years ago when the world experienced the Tide Pod Challenge pandemic. Also, not the flu. The Norwegian Institute of Public Health, or NIPH, went out of its way to publicly debunk the claim that COVID-19 is just the flu, saying the statement was probably a misinterpretation of an interview in a large Norwegian newspaper. When the NIPH says they'll approach COVID like a disease that circulates with seasonal variation, what they mean is they will take health measures similar to the ones they take every year for seasonal illnesses. If only we here in America took health measures against certain seasonal illnesses. This does not mean that illness from coronavirus and the seasonal flu are similar. So how have the three Nordic countries fared compared to the rest of the world? I'll get to that after the break. Welcome back. Over the last 18 months, government restrictions in places like New York City have kept people in their tiny apartments all day and shuttered a lot of local businesses. Meanwhile, the Nordic countries have stayed relatively open, at least compared to America and to Western European countries like France, Italy, and Germany. And their leaders' policies have also killed way fewer grandparents than Andrew Cuomo's. Still waiting to see if he'll ever face any consequences for that. Those three Nordic countries have similar to slightly higher shares of people vaccinated as France, Italy, and Germany. All of those countries are higher than the US vaccination percentage. Denmark leads in terms of having the most people vaccinated as a percentage of the population. And Nordic countries have had lower mortality rates than those other three European countries and the US. And they've had fewer deaths per capita. So all three of the Nordic countries, especially Denmark and Norway, have fared much better than a lot of other countries. Why is that? Well, I attribute this to the fact that Andrew Cuomo wasn't in charge. Many others attribute this to individuals there having a strong sense of social responsibility and accountability, especially in Denmark. People there also seem to trust their government more, which is to say people in Denmark don't believe their government leaders are hollow earth-dwelling reptilian psychic pedophile vampires. Brave of them to assume. When it comes to COVID policy, Danish people have higher levels of trust in national health authorities compared to most other countries. Meanwhile, in America, millions of people don't trust Bill Gates as a national health authority, probably because he's not a national health authority. The Danish government especially wants to maintain a high level of trust with its citizens. According to a professor at Aarhus University, this could be helping the fight against the coronavirus. It is easier for the authorities in a high-trust country to get the population to listen voluntarily and abide by advice and guidance rather than through outright injunctions, which require a lot of the state's resources to enforce. If you have low levels of trust regarding other people or the authorities, then more draconian laws are potentially required to contain the coronavirus. Or you could try bribing people to get the vaccine with a lotto for guns, trucks, and cash. America! In the US, many cities and states have implemented vaccine mandates so strict that you can't even go to a restaurant without proof of vaccination. And you can even lose your job for not getting vaccinated. A year ago, unvaccinated Starbucks baristas were considered heroes. Now they're considered villains because they spread the seasonal disease. Sorry, these seasonal diseases. And while Norway, Denmark, and Sweden have lifted their COVID restrictions, when these countries did use COVID passports, theirs had a big difference from the vaccine passports here in the US. Namely, these Nordic countries required people to show either proof of vaccination, a negative test result, or proof of a previous COVID infection. In other words, these countries recognized natural immunity due to prior COVID infection was just as acceptable as being vaccinated. That's not the case in the US. According to some public health experts, this has really damaged Americans' trust in both public health officials and the US government. The incorrect hypothesis that natural immunity is unreliable has resulted in the loss of thousands of American lives, avoidable vaccine complications, and damaged the credibility of public health officials. Speaking of trust, another professor from Aarhus University, who leads Denmark's largest behavioral coronavirus research project, says trust goes both ways.
One of the sort of key premises of the Danish response has been an understanding that you need to trust citizens and that you acknowledge that citizens can deal with complex information.
Unlike here in America, where former President Trump said he downplayed COVID to try and prevent people from panicking. Okay, considering how everyone hoarded toilet paper, he may have made the right call. But now, more than 18 months after 2 weeks to slow the spread, we still have U.S. officials who are afraid to tell Americans natural immunity works. It's not just the Danes who say governments need to trust people to handle complex information. For one, people can handle complex information is basically the whole idea behind America Uncovered. Plus, Americans sat through 6 seasons of Lost. If that isn't proof we can handle complex information, I don't know what is. The British Medical Journal finds that we need the kind of transparency that isn't filtered through corporate press releases or statements to investors, or a kind of pseudo-transparency in which the manufacturers are trying to massage or control the message. And a study by the National Academy of Sciences says we even need to be transparent about the negative features of vaccines, despite their crucial role in combating the pandemic. This could decrease acceptance, but increase trust. Of course, I'm not saying there are any negative features of vaccines, because that YouTube ban hammer is always hovering above my head. A lot of politicians feel pressured to just end the pandemic as quickly as possible, and they'll do whatever it takes. Lockdowns, vaccine mandates, keeping schools closed, you name it. Even when data on coronavirus cases no longer justifies it. But while these harsh rules can work at first, they tend to create a lot of problems down the line, and they wreck long-term trust in the government. Sustaining trust during the pandemic is critical for health authorities, both if repeated vaccinations are necessary and in preparation for future health emergencies. The Nordic countries seem to understand this. In a democracy, compliance with public advice and policy is a function of citizen discretion, and hence, the authorities must rely on persuasion and voluntary compliance. Persuasion and voluntary compliance. I don't know. Sounds like something a hollow, earth-dwelling, reptilian, psychic pedophile vampire would say, just to make us lower our guards. And despite their high levels of support for the government's COVID-19 policies, Danes don't appear to resort to blaming and shaming to keep each other in line. In other words, most people followed the advice of the authorities and didn't take it upon themselves to police others. But if I don't blame and shame everyone around me, how will I feel better about myself? You know, besides eating meatballs while dancing to ABBA. Here in the US, President Biden met his goal of 70% of adults vaccinated with at least 1 dose. But a month later, he still began implementing vaccine mandates, despite his earlier promise that vaccination would not be mandatory. You can see how that lowers public trust in the government. The only thing transparent about Joe Biden is his hair. And Biden's vaccine mandates lead not to cooperation, but to endless partisan bickering, making anything those in charge say harder to swallow than fårikål. So what do you think? Leave your comments below. And if you like this show, please know we could not do it without direct support from viewers like you. Visit patreon.com/AmericaUncovered and contribute $1 or more per episode to help us keep the show going. So click the link below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.